Jeff Joseph, President of the Software and Information Industry Association. The American Innovation and Choice Online Act, currently under consideration in the U.S. Senate, is aimed at curbing what some see as anti-competitive behavior on the part of large technology platforms. As with many large, comprehensive pieces of legislation, the challenge is in the details. Many companies, think tanks, trade associations, and thought leaders are concerned about the unintended consequences of the bill, including the potential impact on data privacy, national security, consumer choice, antitrust policy, and innovation. Another serious concern is the bill's impact on small businesses which rely on large tech platforms to expand their customer base and grow their business. This is a particular concern for small minority-owned businesses who rely on digital tools to help overcome historic inequities. So I'm so excited today to speak with Dr. Benjamin Chaviz, President and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. NNPA represents some 230 regional and local Black newspapers with more than 30 million readers per week. The NNPA sent a letter to the Congressional Black Caucus earlier this year expressing concerns with the bill. Now, my guest today really needs no introduction. He's a renowned civil rights leader who served as executive director and CEO of the NAACP and is national director of the Million Man March. He is founder and CEO of the National African American Leadership Summit and co-founder of the Hip Hop Summit Action Network, designed to harness the cultural relevance of hip hop music to serve as a catalyst for education advocacy and other societal concerns fundamental to the empowerment of youth. He began his civil rights career as an assistant to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and as the leader of the Wilmington 10, a civil rights activist group wrongfully convicted of committing arson in protest of civil rights abuses. Dr. Chaviz holds numerous degrees as an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a movie producer. He's not only a civil rights legend, he's a true Renaissance man indeed. Dr. Chaviz, welcome. Thanks for joining us on Tech Ann.
Thank you, Jeff, and shout out of support to what you do with Tech Ann and all the brothers and sisters that you work with. I just think this discussion that we're having in this series is so important. So thank you for giving the NNPA an opportunity to join our voice in this very public debate, dialogue about the future. And certainly one of the reasons why we wrote the letter to the Congressional Black Caucus and to the members of the FCC is that we were concerned that our interests have been triaged or not even spoken to when it came to the big tech platforms. On the record, I can say that we have a working relationship with Google, with Facebook and other big tech that has helped us have better equity consideration in the marketplace. As you know, things are moving, we're in a digital age, and access to the digital marketplace for an entrepreneur, particularly for a Black-owned newspaper, is vital for them to stay in business. And I have to say again on the record that Google and Facebook have been tremendously supportive financially as well as technologically to help us compete with the larger conglomerate in media, in the print space, in the digital space, in the radio space, and in the television space. So this is a very important matter, and I was somewhat taken back that the bill had advanced so far without consideration of minority-owned media businesses.
Thank you. I think that's a critically important point. Maybe you can help our audiences understand exactly how some of those online tools, like Google's tools for small businesses, its Ad Transformation Lab, how they help support your members, why this is so important.
Absolutely. And we have something right now called the Google News Initiative Lab Transformation, where they're actually working with a number of our publishers across the country, large publishers, small publishers, and to help them with their digital advertising. I mean, all media, advertising is the lifeblood to keep media organizations going. And minority-owned businesses, particularly minority-owned Black newspapers like the African-American-owned newspapers, we needed that technical assistance. So beyond what the monetary value was, it was the sustainability. As you know, a lot of people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but very few companies practice it. And I think that I can say, because people say, well, why are you defending Google? Why are you defending Facebook? It's not about defending, it's about adding a word of truth to the propositions that are being put forward. And I think that unintended consequence, sometimes well-intentioned people will do things that will have negative consequences to the very constituencies that they purport to represent.
And yes, and history is replete with those instances, as you well know. One of the things you talked about in your letter is concerns about the language in the bill about so-called self-preferencing, which would prevent tech platforms from favoring their own products or services. Can you talk a little bit about your specific concerns with that approach?
Yeah, specifically because it seemed to me that the role of the FCC is to put forth public policy that is inclusive, not exclusive. And I think that we need to talk about digital equity. We need to talk about media equity. We need to talk about sustainability. And some of that specific language that you just referenced in the bill, I felt was going to be a disadvantage, particularly to African-American owned newspapers.
Thank you. So, we sit here today, we were just talking before we started where we are. It's the day after the first there are several planned scheduled hearings on what happened on January 6th. And of course, while different people may have different opinions about how it started and whatnot, that clearly in some way it's related to misinformation about the election. I know many of your members worked hard through their publications to combat misinformation around elections and equal access to voting. What do you think, what might be the effect of this bill of the SIIA would have on those efforts?
Well, I'm pleased to report to you, I received some information yesterday that they're trying to change the bill with new language. I think there has been an acknowledgement, and I can say this on the record, that when they received my letter, first they were kind of taken aback, but then they said, well, Dr. Chaviz the NMPA may have a good point here. So I understand that they are changing the language. I haven't seen it. They said they're changing. They were supposed to send it to me. I haven't received it yet. But specifically, right before we started this segment, we talked about the January 6th live broadcast. And I said, look, the media is part of the problem. Not all media, but we do have some media that contributes to the polarization, that contributes to the inequity. And it's interesting that some of the major media companies that were supporting this proposal to the FCC have had themselves a history of inequitable relationship with minority-owned newspapers and other minority-owned media companies. And so, I think, just to be very honest, Jeff, I think some people were startled when they saw my letter. But I had to feel like I needed to represent the constituency that we represent. And unfortunately, when it comes to national public policy, too often, minority-owned businesses' interests are not even at the table being discussed.
I'm going to come back to that point. I think that's such a critical point. I know that some of the platforms have provided tools to help provide the facts and accurate information on everything from voting location to politicians' positions, and that hopefully when we see this language that concern that they wouldn't be able to provide that because that would be considered preferential treatment to their own services. But hopefully that piece of the bill is changed. But I want to go back to the point you made because I want our audience to understand the importance of your constituency and the critical role that these newspapers and your members provide. Growing up, I greatly remember reading and still that provided a point of view that I couldn't find in mainstream media. So could you just describe for our audience a little bit so they have a better idea of who you represent and the importance of your members?
And the timeline is very important. This is 2022, Jeff. I'm pleased to say that the Black Press of America this year is 195 years old. The first African-American owned publication was in March of 1827 with the publishing of Freedom's Journal. And if you go back and look at that first edition, it was published in New York City. It was talking about pleading our own cause. Yes, we report the facts, we report the news, but we also report the facts and news as advocates of freedom, justice, equality, and equity. And we've been doing this for 195 years. So when a lot of the major, even newspaper organizations, the reason why we have the NMPA when the National Newspaper Association was first formed, they wouldn't allow Black newspapers to be a member. It's been this whole struggle. And so we represent 230 African-American owned newspapers. Many of these newspapers are second and third generation owned, family run businesses. We serve urban areas, we serve suburban areas, we serve rural areas, and we reach all 50 states. About 30 million people we reach in print a week. And we even reach more now with the help of some of the big tech companies. We reach more people now, even digitally. So anything that's going to impact what big tech does is going to impact what small tech does.
Right, right.
If I could use that term, minority tech, equity tech. So I think that the FCC, I understand why we have the FCC, but I'm asking the FCC to also, before anything is finally put forth, that they use some assessments, some minority impact assessments, some equity assessments, and some technology assessments to make sure that whatever is being proposed will, increase access to the latest forms of technology and not restrict or restrain. It's interesting to me, why would anybody want to tell the big tech companies that they can't aid and try to build an equitable bridge to minority-owned businesses? No one has yet to answer that question.
Yeah, right. I think, as you know, some of the work we're focused on is digital equity, and we define that very broadly. So it's about access to both the tools and broadband. It's about ensuring that we don't do digital redlining and digital discrimination by slowing down broadband speeds in certain areas. But it's also to the point you made about thinking more deeply about some of these issues. I often say that as we think about data privacy, for example, and clearly there's an effort to ensure that I'm not served as a minority. There's certain content that doesn't reach me, and I think that's meant with good intent. But if I'm targeted for, say, information on sickle cell, that's beneficial to me. So that information, that data they can collect about me and about my minority status can be a positive. So as we plan policy, we have to think more broadly. And the only way to do that is to include groups like yours in the conversation.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Chaviz, thank you so much for your time today. You've been more than generous. Greatly appreciate all the work you do in the pursuit and continued advocacy for equity, for diversity, for civil rights. It's a true honor to speak with you today.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and the NMPA. We look forward to continuing to work with you and Tech and all of the colleagues that you work in the technology industry.
Very good. Thank you again. Thank you. This has been, I'm Jeff Joseph with Dr. Benjamin Chaviz. This has been Tech and. Thank you.